Since the late 90s, Shawn Tuma has been working with legal departments and security teams at the intersection of law and technology. This has given him a unique perspective for how these important defenders work well together and do not work well together, and what a difference that can make with how their organizations manage cyber risk. This led him to write a book called the GC+CISO Connection to help start a dialogue and strengthen the partnership between these critically important roles. The next step is to bring together people who understand these roles to share their experiences and continue the dialogue. Because none of us have all the answers, it is through conversations like these that we can all improve how we work together to improve cyber resilience. This is the GC+CISO Connection Show.
Hello and welcome to the GC+CISO Connection Show. I'm your host, Shawn Tuma. Joining me today is my friend, Janie Aggas. I got that right? Okay. And Janie is the Global Business Information Security Officer for CBRE.
That's right.
And Janie, first, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the show. And it's just really a pleasure. You and I have been talking on LinkedIn a lot. We may have met sometime back in the past, but we've had a lot to talk about with your recent studies and things of that nature. And I certainly want to get into those issues. But thank you for joining us. And I generally like to get started by you just introducing yourself a little bit and talking about your current role. What is a BISO? The Business Information Security Officer. We've been hearing the word CISO all over the place, but a BISO. And I know you just talked about that on the Professional CISO show with David, but if you'll just give us a little bit about that and then what your current role is. And then I want to get into your education and your training and how you got there.
Okay, perfect. So my current role is, as you mentioned, the head of the Global Business Information Security Office at CBRE. And we call it BISO for short, just like you call CISOs for short. But BISOs, the focus, it kind of depends on the company, but at the core, the role of the BISO is to serve as the liaison between cybersecurity and the business. And in many cases, mine included, also a liaison between cybersecurity and the technology side of the business. So it's kind of got a bifurcated direction there. And what we do, I think when you think about the CISO, they're driving technology, strategy, particularly around security and security controls. The BISO's focus is basically supporting the CISO, but with the business lens. So the role of the BISO is to get in deep with the business, understand the business. Generally speaking, CISOs, right, cover an entire company. I know sometimes there can be maybe departmental CISOs, but generally they might cover an entire organization, could be huge. And they are, with their focus on the technology piece, they don't necessarily have the time to sit down and get deep into the individual business units and understand the business strategies. That's where the BISO comes in. And they will get in tight with the executive teams on the business side and really understand what is the roadmap for the business? What kinds of things are you going after? And then what the BISO does is bring that information back to cybersecurity and make sure that the controls and the strategy that we're setting and we're moving forward with and what we're implementing in cybersecurity supports the business and the direction the business is going.
That sounds like a very important role because so much of what we hear is, cybersecurity is the department of no, or they're the obstacle or the cost center or whatever, much like legal. And they don't understand the business and how the business works. But it sounds like I often call myself the Rosetta Stone in a way, the role I play between legal and security. You're playing that role between business and security and helping them work together efficiently and understanding each other. You're the first BISO that I've talked with, and so it's really great to know that.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it. I've had the opportunity to serve in a leadership capacity for a BISO community, already 2 large organizations, and the way they staff it and the way they structure it has been a little bit different between the two. But overall, in both cases, it's been incredibly valuable. I would say myself, I report directly into the CISO, but I'm essentially dotted lined into the CIO, and then also on the business side, directly into, like, say, the top level COOs as a good example. So those are like the level of people that I'm interacting with as a BISO. And in the cases where I have an entire team under me, we can structure them very differently depending on the needs of the business. There's a lot of flexibility, and for your listeners, FSISAC put out a really, really good article or white paper, if you will, on the role of a BISO that talks about the different types of BISO alignment, whether it's functional, product focused, or geographically focused, or maybe a hybrid of the mix. My experience is with BISO is every company's kind of leveraging a little bit of a hybrid.
Yeah, that is. I mean, I can see the need for the flexibility, right? And that it's a very strategic kind of role. I mean, you're not doing technical kind of work. You're helping key parts of the business work together in a way that's going to make them more effective and more efficient.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So how did you get here? How did you get into this role? What's your background?
It's kind of interesting. My early career, honestly, I was actually in real estate then too. But I had a really keen focus in high school and up into my early college years around law. But I also had a keen focus in technology. And originally, I wanted to be in a role like a paralegal. And
Oh no.
I didn't.
Don't want to do that.
I didn't do that. But I studied kind of a little bit of a combination of law and technology, and I went to work for 2 real estate attorneys. What I did, though, actually was I served as an escrow officer doing residential and commercial closing. So I learned a lot about real estate law. But I kept on feeling the pull to get into technology. So I went back to school, completed a BBA in computer information systems, later went back for my MBA. When I was making that transition from real estate into technology, I had an opportunity to do an internship as I was completing my BBA, and I did it out at Pantex, which you may know is a government facility responsible for assembling and disassembling nuclear weapons. So you're dealing
pretty
with
high level,
very sensitive information and sensitive assets, quite frankly, data and otherwise. But I had a chance to really get into the technology side there, and literally did everything from, working directly on laptops and desktops, and I could replace motherboards and add RAM, and I could do a lot of the technical stuff from a desktop perspective, but I also was given the opportunity to serve on their enterprise architecture team. So I was specifically representing the desktop area, but I sat with the other architects for all the spaces, and it was a huge learning opportunity. I loved it, but the combination of that, and then also was given the opportunity to build out IT service management while I was out at Pantex. That combination was magical. And after spending a little bit of time working for a government contractor, I was ready to move into the private sector, or public sector, I guess I should say, because, it's always continuing resolutions. Will the budget be approved? Could you get furloughed? Kind of the uncertainty. I got tired of that.
Yeah.
And so when I started to look for a different role, I landed with Fidelity Investments as an IT service manager. So I kind of leveraged that technology background, shifted it to Fidelity, started there for a kind of a smaller business unit. They loved what I did. And the senior VP, the lead for that group, came to me after a year and he said, "You already have a really good grasp on your role. I'd like for you to take on governance, risk, and compliance for us. We're doing a terrible job at some very specific things. And I think your skill set would be great there." In addition to
and
what
that's
you're
in financial services,
Yes.
which is highly regulated.
highly
Yes.
regulated. So, but he gave me that opportunity. I had never done that type of work before, but I loved it. And it also gave me an introduction to information security officers as they were structured there, and became a really good partner with that team. And just as things developed and things grew, ready to move on and start to stretch myself, I was given an opportunity to shift directly into cybersecurity and serve as an information security officer. And actually it started as a security consultant role. So it was a very, I'm going to call it dynamic, not a linear path.
Yeah, not a traditional start as a, analyst and just take that step by step, work your way up.
Right. But even then too, when I made it into cybersecurity proper, and I did the true what we would consider now BISO role for a specific business, that grew, and then I was able to take on the role for the biggest business unit at Fidelity. And in parallel, I served as the CISO for their life insurance company. So huge opportunities, but you can see over, let's say 2 decades of work there, the development from a little bit of law background, shifting into technology solely, and then kind of doing a little bit of a combination. And I will never forget one of the real estate lawyers that I worked for initially. I had told him when I was leaving that I wanted to get into technology, but I really loved law. And he said, there's no reason you can't do both. And what I will say, the BISO role or leading up a BISO community to me is that magical combination of both.
Janie, one of the things that strikes me as you're talking about your background is I think about my own background and conversations I have with primarily younger attorneys or younger security people about trying to plot out the future of their career path. And I got into I wanted to be a corporate lawyer because I was scared of speaking in public, so I didn't want to have to be a trial litigation attorney, and that was my ideal role. Graduate or second year of law school, then I did an internship, found I loved litigation, and then 1998 got into the Y2K issues that led me to the technology side of things, and so I was a litigation attorney by day because I had to have billable work. The Y2K issue, I had some work, but not a whole lot. That got me into the technology side of things. But then over the years, I've found those paths have shifted so much. I've done, a lot of corporate work with transactions, a lot of compliance and governance and risk management, intellectual property, all those things. And at the time you're into those roles, you're like, well, how did I get here? And where does this fit in my plan? It's not until much later you look back and go, wow, all of that came together to give me the individual skill sets that I now need to do the role I'm in. That's exactly where you are. I mean, when you were looking at getting into technology, you probably had no idea there would ever be a role called a BISO role, right? And it reminds me of this video that was put out probably 2010 or 11. I don't remember who did it. It was some technology company. They did it at their annual meeting, and it said, we are moving our society at an exponential rate to the point where the jobs we are training people for right now don't exist yet. And I think we have to always think about that with how we look in the future, because none of our roles are going to be the same in 5 years.
No. I once had a manager tell me, don't have a career on accident. And I took that to heart. He was just saying, be very intentional about what you want to go after, and don't lose sight of you're here today, but you want to continue to strive for other things. But I also think in my case, like you just mentioned, when I started my early career, the cybersecurity didn't even honestly exist.
Yeah. No, we were just getting into the .com era and the internet and email and things like that. We weren't thinking, how do we secure this stuff yet?
No. And so I think it's, to your point, focusing on where you have natural areas of passion and building up certain skill sets. And I think over time that will form to lead you in the direction you need to go. Certainly be intentional too, but I think it's the aggregation of those different skill sets that is so valuable. And that's what you need to be intentional about building.
Yeah, it's growing and learning from wherever you are at that time, whatever you can learn. And speaking of being intentional, you have now come full circle, because one of the things you and I've connected over is the merger of cyber and law. And your career is coming full circle because you just finished your master's of cybersecurity law and public policy at Texas A&M. So congratulations, Janie.
Thank you.
Yeah. So tell us, what was that like? What pushed you into that direction? And what are your experiences like? And what can you tell our listeners? I know I have at least one person listening who I've talked to about doing that. So be listening. Janie's going to give you some good tips here.
What led me to it, I had been in a specific role for 4 years, and it was a very high level role, probably the topmost role that I could have in that space. And that was kind of the combination of what they called a strategic information security officer, which was basically a lead for a BISO community, and then also the CISO role. And I wanted to continue to learn. I was doing really well in that job, in that role, but I wanted to learn more. And so I was seeking ways to continue to expand and grow. And that is when I, probably quite by accident, stumbled upon the MLS cybersecurity law and policy offering on LinkedIn. Texas A&M had, in your feed, it was one of those things that came up. I thought, ooh, that's kind of interesting. And what was intriguing to me is I don't have a formal cybersecurity training per se, right? Because, as we just talked about, my path has been somewhat organic, but I always kind of wanted a little bit of that too. So I looked at the program kind of in depth, that it has a focus on the law side, business law, regulatory law, contract law, dispute resolution, all of the things you would think of it from a traditional law perspective. But then it also had cybersecurity law, cyber risk management, compliance for defense industry. The very last ones I took were digital forensics and legal analysis and writing for clients. But it had that curriculum, if you will, put together. I was like, this looks like the right combination, a good combination of true and traditional law with a mix of cybersecurity law, and then some underlying or underpinning elements of cybersecurity that I would love to learn more about. So that was the catch for me.
And I can see Texas A&M now you're going to be like their poster child for advocating for this, because those are all such important areas that I feel like that I deal with, that I work with, that I see companies struggle with. And, I still face a lot of questions sometimes from lawyers and security people over what does a lawyer have to do with cybersecurity? And that's a lot of what prompted me to write the book that I wrote and to start this podcast, to help share these kind of experiences. So of your experiences, can you give us some that are the most important things that have jumped out to you?
With regards to the relationship between, let's say, me as a business information security officer and the law side, and to your point, there's always been heavy partnership with the legal team. You said this in your book, which I believe, where you said all cyber events are also legal events. Yeah. And it is so true. And everybody needs to understand that. Because I can say from my experience, I've seen people in the business that don't understand that, and quite frankly can put the business at risk because they go and attempt to, fix certain things on their own.
Yeah, for sure.
It's very dangerous. And I think you highlighted that in the book as well, when you were talking about a company where someone fell for a fish and the fish went out to others, and some of the interaction. It was a perfect illustration of, what kind of a little bit of what can happen there. And some people just don't think about it as a legal event, but it truly is.
Yeah.
In my role, I interact with the legal team daily. And quite frankly, I've worked on building a really strong relationship there, that even sometimes when there's an issue going on that's not cyber related, the business will pull on me because of my relationship with the legal team. Mm-hmm. And so that's been a great example of the strength of the BISO role. But to your point, it's everyday things along the lines of communicating with clients, where we need to be well connected with the legal team. It's things like communicating to the board. I don't do that in my current role, but have in the past. And you likely know, you have to be very careful about what you communicate to the board. You have to be very careful about what you put into a slide deck. Yep. What words are on the page versus what you might say verbally. You even have to understand, to what extent meeting minutes are captured, because those are discoverable, right? And there are so many things to interact with the legal team on a daily basis. It's a lot.
It is. And, I'm interested on the board side. Where do you fit in? How do you help prepare these topics for the board? And then who makes that ultimate presentation to the board?
So in my current role, the CISO does ultimately do the presentations with the audit committee, and I do think it, as a result, sometimes does end up in there with the board. From my past role, where I was a CISO for the life insurance company, I actually presented to the board, and so that's where it came from. Now, as a BISO role, I would say probably globally or holistically, however you think about it, my role or the BISO role is to help with the translation between business and cyber. So many CISOs are very technical, and many boards are not.
Absolutely, yeah. That's such a interesting dichotomy there, and it's such a difficulty in communication. They're speaking different language.
They are. So that's part of the role right now. Like the CISO, he will work together and put together how to illustrate that the work we're doing tactically and strategically is supporting the business and helping to prevent incidents and reduce risk for the business, right? My role in that would also be to surface additional ways that we're working with the business in support of those initiatives. So as the BISO role, it's really to help serve as input into those processes. Like I said, I've been in both positions where I'm actually reporting to the board myself, or where I'm supporting the CISO directly, or even sometimes the CIO, right? Because they end up in those conversations as well. It really depends, I think, on the structure of the organization, how much of a role the BISO might play in that.
Yeah, it really does. And, excuse me, one of the issues that I really focused on with the book early on that I wanted to tackle was coming up with best practices on a reporting structure and then reporting up to the board. And so as I started writing, I had my own preconceived ideas. And then as I did research, I realized my ideas weren't necessarily the right ideas. And then as I've had conversations with others since writing the book, I've learned it really is dependent upon the needs of the organization. I don't think there is a best practice for that because the organizational needs are going to dictate that. But you should be nimble and agile as an organization to understand that there is not it must work this way type role, and to have it in a way that works the best for that organization. But one thing I do know for sure, when you're in the role of preparing for board presentations and doing them, you learn a lot more on how to help others get prepared for that.
That is true.
Because I find myself, I have some clients that I'll sit on like a risk committee with them or whatnot with their team, and then they'll ask me to make board presentations about the maturity of the organization cyber program or various issues. And when you're in that seat and you're getting those questions, you learn a lot more about how to structure what you're preparing, like you said. So
you do, and I will tell you, one of the benefits I've had over my career is, and I hate to say this benefit piece, some people may balk at this, but I've actually sat with examiners. I'm talking with SEC as an examiner, FTC. I'm thinking of the other one too, but that helped me learn also about what needs to be presented to the board. Because let's face it, depending on what regulators you're in scope with, if you're doing business in the state of New York and your financial service, you're going to have OIDFS, and they have a very specific cybersecurity regulation, and there are specifics that it draws out, as well as the FTC safeguards rule that draws out things that have to be in the board presentation, right? So
and who has to sign off?
And who has to sign off, and then sitting with examiners too helped me understand what they were going to drill into. It was very interesting with the FTC in particular. I had an examiner that drilled into, when you talked about metrics, like what metrics are important to a board. Quite frankly, I don't know that many board members really care about your patching compliance numbers.
Right.
What is their role in oversight of that? Are you doing it? Are you really keeping a good eye on that? But I had an examiner once that kind of drilled into what is your patching compliance? And it was something like 99% was really good. And he's like, okay, but that's not 100%. So how many servers weren't patched? How much was that 1%? And out of those servers that weren't patched, how many patching cycles were missed? Okay. And then, out of those patching cycles that were missed, how many of them included patching for critical CVEs? Like they got into the weeds. And I was thinking to myself, we would never get into that level of detail with a board.
Oh, God, no.
But they really dug in. But kind of going through some of those experiences helped me to understand if some of those particulars were in the board presentation, even in an appendix, let's say, when the examiners come in and see that material, it helps put some of those questions to bed out of the gate.
Yeah. And Janie, you're really highlighting one of the key objectives that I've had with this whole project. And that is early on in my role of working with legal and cyber teams, there was so much territorialism. There was so much ego and this mindset of I own this and I control this and I don't need anybody else meddling in my business. And it's really struck me over the years that this is the ultimate team event, team sport. Mm-hmm. And we need the collaboration, not just because we need the resources, but we need the perspectives. We need to understand the perspectives of the different people in these different roles. And when you talk about the perspective of the examiners and the regulators, that is a very, very important perspective that most people never get to see. And then the perspective of the board and the perspective of the legal team and the perspective of the security team. All of those things come into this. One thing I want to jump to, because I know you brought a couple of books with you that you felt were important to talk about. Can you just tell us what books you brought and what you feel like are the key takeaways?
Sure. These were, going after the MLS and Cybersecurity Law and Policy program at Texas A&M, I thought it was kind of unique. Some of the classes didn't use traditional textbooks like you would think of for college, but they leveraged others. And one that I thought in particular was good, Fight Fire with Fire. Just kind of show the cover there. It was written by Renee Tarun. You may know. Deputy CISO at Fortinet. She may not be that any longer, but this one I loved. I believe this was part of the Foundations of Cybersecurity course I took. We have this book, but it's a pretty small book, if you will, but every chapter was written by a different CISO.
Oh, that's
with
great.
A different focus.
Yeah.
One of the CISOs wrote about operational technology security. There's one that's, who's behind evolving threat landscape. But I love the fact that each of these were written by CISOs.
Yeah, and it's providing their perspective.
Yeah. And it's all about proactive cybersecurity strategies for today's leaders. So that one was a wonderful one. This one is more of a traditional textbook, Cybersecurity Law by Jeff Kosef. Mm-hmm. And honestly, I had a good interaction with him because when I was going through the cybersecurity law class, I loved this book. I was like, you can see I've got a little bookmark here, but there's so much good information. And quite honestly, the courses I took were 12-week classes condensed down to 6 weeks. So for me, and that's the reason why you see that I still have these books, they're reference material and resources for me going forward. And so I'll certainly revisit, but in this one in particular, one of these chapters talks about anti-hacking laws and focuses on the different relevant cybersecurity laws like the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, Economic Espionage Act, of the Stored Communications Act. It really got into the specifics and the weeds. So very good book and very good resource. And the other one I really, really liked is the Cybersecurity for Executives. This one by, I think these are related folks, Gregory and Joseph Tuhill, but again, just chock full of information. In this one in particular, they would go over specific cases. I think they're early in the book, specific, legal cases, and would even talk about, okay, here's the lessons we can learn from that case. Here are things that you can put in place based upon the case. Yeah. So it's not just theoretical to me. It gives you true takeaways that you can take and put into your day-to-day practice. Yeah. And that I love. And of course, your book, the one we're talking about today, this is terrific. And I keep on wanting to reread it. I did not take it on vacation.
Well, I'm glad you didn't. I would be really worried about you.
But I was tempted. But I love the book, and I've got to read. I read it in the fall, and I started rereading a little bit. But I will say one of the key things I took away that I loved that you put in this book was a quote by Wayne Gretzky about going to where the puck is going, not where it's at. And I think that's the heart of cybersecurity is, you have to anticipate where the puck is going.
Yeah.
You definitely have to focus on where it's at as well. Like when you're thinking about security controls and protecting and reducing risk, but you also have to be thinking about where the puck's going. AI is a perfect example when you think about everything with AI. So these are just a few of the really good books.
Well, thank you for mentioning that, Janie, and for bringing the books, because I never get rid of books. I still have my law school books, probably all of them somewhere. The ones, contracts, procedure, things like that. Because there's so much knowledge and you put a lot of effort into studying them. Those notes, those underlines, those are valuable tools later. I remember a few years back, I took a course called Common Law in law school. And I had a very difficult case where there was literally no statutory or even, for the most part, relevant key case law. And I had to reason back to the old English common law and use the Iliad in my argument about an issue. And actually the judge liked it and we won. But that came from a common law course that I took in 1996, But one of the things I love that you keyed in on that quote from Wayne Gretzky, because one of the areas that I talk about between the synergies between legal and cyber is that we live in a world of grays. We don't have absolute answers to many of the questions. And it's easy for people to sit back and point to things that happen and say, well, that was obvious. Why didn't you see that? Regulators are great at this.
Oh, yes.
So are plaintiffs' lawyers. But it's much more difficult to sit here today and reason forward and say, what do we think is most likely to be our greatest risk or our greatest threat or where we're going to get hit or things like that? And that necessarily means we're going to get it wrong sometimes. There's no manual for that. There's no there's some best practice, but there's no form book or treatise. You have to draw upon your experience. And that's where the real value of experienced professionals, whether it's legal, cyber, business, risk, whatever else, really comes into play. And when you bring all those people together with all their different perspectives, you do a much better job of defining that issue and making that prediction, I believe.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's what we're here for.
When you mentioned that, it made me think of emerging technology.
Yeah.
And I'll share with you an example from the past. I had a business that wanted to do a launch of an immersive educational experience into Decentraland. So you start thinking historically from a cyber perspective, what are the things you would typically do if you are going to deploy something on somebody else's infrastructure?
Yeah.
You're thinking of third-party risk management. Would you maybe do a third-party risk assessment? And so I quite honestly had people in cybersecurity that were like, let's do a vendor risk assessment. Like, who are you going to send it to? Decentraland isn't a traditional third party. It's led and kind of managed by a decentralized autonomous organization, a DAO. Mm-hmm. There's not.
Who's going to complete that questionnaire?
Exactly. Yeah. And so it's turning everything on its head. And to your point, even things like, they were to leverage an NFT as a reward for completing this educational experience. And we had to turn things on its head to think about, okay, how do you secure an NFT? Is there anything special you need to look at for an NFT? Could they embed malware in a non-fungible token? And that's where, from a BISO perspective, we play a key relationship management role, to your point, pulling in the legal team, pulling in, like in that case, pulling in the pen testing team to say, okay,
how would you attack?
Exactly. Yeah. And bringing we're not the technical experts, but we can certainly bring in the right people to talk about how would you tackle these things, or how can we do our best possible job at securing this emerging technology. Even and then thinking about from a financial services being highly regulated, any type of interaction between the company and an individual, let's just say on Decentraland, of course, or you're required to record those and retain them, et cetera. And how do you do that? Or how can you prevent that technology or that feature from being used if you don't have the capability to retain chats and things of that nature?
Yeah.
It's just bringing all the right people together. And I loved that piece of the role because I was close to the business. I knew what they were wanting to do with this launch. And then I could bring the right technology and cyber and legal teams to the table to figure out how to do it as safely as possible.
Yeah. And that collaborative effort and knowing who to bring sometimes is really, really valuable.
It is very valuable.
So as we're winding down here, one of the things I always like to do, and Janie, you have such a wonderful broad base of experience and expertise in so many areas. Give us a couple of tips that you may have for people in a security role for how to better work with their legal team, maybe their BISO role, and then vice versa, how legal department can better collaborate excuse me, and work with the people in these other roles.
Sure. So I would say first and foremost, identify the legal team.
Yeah.
Identify the players that you need to develop a relationship with and start to develop the relationship. Simply start with introductions. What is their background? What are their focus areas? You could easily talk to legal counsel and ask them, what have you been involved in from cybersecurity in the past? What do you see as pain points from the past? How can I help? And then also, I say for folks in a BISO role who might be involved in, like I mentioned earlier, communications and things where you need input from the legal team. It's also that the legal team they typically aren't cyber experts. We do have some, right, that are. But so when you're taking a cyber event and helping to put together communication, I always say something that helps the legal team is I'll give them a starting point.
Mm-hmm.
Because I have the knowledge from the cyber perspective. I can put something together decently well, and then they can take it and modify it, kind of evolve it. So that's one of the things I do from a relationship perspective, but also because a lot of times time is of the essence. And
for sure.
I think you mentioned this in the book too, that the contracts sometimes mandate how quickly you have to report things. And so a lot of times you don't have time at your luxury, right?
Yeah.
And so working together with the legal team on things like that. I think those are some of the tips that I have. Make sure you're establishing the relationships with the legal team. Ask them how you can help them. Ask them about the pain points they've experienced in the past, and involve them. Let's say you're in a company or organization where you don't have to have the heavy interaction. Maybe meet with them on a monthly or quarterly basis and share with them some insights from a cyber perspective to help educate them. Those are sort of the tidbits I would say.
I mean, I love those tips. And in fact, on page 103 of the book, it starts the chapter talking about collaboration. And then on page 108, there's 2 pages of questions and topics just to start talking about. And that was another one of the main goals, was just to say, hey, if you don't know your legal counsel, or if you don't know your security team, sit down and start talking. Go have coffee and go through a couple of these questions and just get to know each other and let it start from there.
Yes, I think that is key. Now, me personally, I've always been very much interested in law, so I've always had that desire to want to connect and partner with the legal teams. But and everywhere I've worked, they've been incredible people to work with. And they're always happy to partner, and they're happy to learn.
We lawyers aren't such bad people.
That's right.
I spend a lot of time with security people, but we lawyers aren't such bad people either. Well, Janie, thank you so much for joining us. Our time here just flew by. I feel like we could carry on this conversation all day, and it would be great, really, to do a follow-up in the future about how you're seeing your education impacting your role maybe in a year or so, of where you are and where you're at that point, where that role evolves to. So thank you very much. And thank you all for tuning in and listening to this episode of the GC+CISO Connection Show. And I hope you will go and share and like and follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter, now X, and all the other sources out there. And please just, if you have any questions or any ideas on things we could cover in the future, please reach out to me. Let me know. I'd love to hear from you. So thank you very much.